Welcome to the Stephan podcast.
Hey guys, it's your host, Stephan, and today my guest is Justin Moon. Justin has been doing a lot of really interesting work recently in terms of educating people about Bitcoin with his YouTube videos and also his new BUIDL Bootcamp. So welcome to the show, Justin.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here. I'm a loyal listener, and I love following you on the internet. It's great to meet, and actually hear your voice, have a chat with you.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so look, Justin, I know you've got a really interesting story, and you only recently came into Bitcoin. So maybe just start with a little bit of your story on how did you get into Bitcoin, and just how did you pick it up so quickly?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this a little bit. I talked to I was on Marty Bent's podcast, and I had one answer, and I've thought about it a little bit since then because I hadn't really reflected on it. But I think for a long time I've thought money is really an interesting idea. Like when I look back, I think a foundational thing for me was that I switched schools a lot because I always hated school, and I ended up at like a really fancy, rich prep school. And so I was like a lower, lower middle class kid, surrounded by the people who. The families who ran all the big companies in Minneapolis where I grew up. And so that was like, in middle school, high school, that was kind of a thing I was surrounded by. I was like, wow, everyone has way more money than me. So I just ended up kind of thinking about money a lot during those years. And so it's been kind of in the back of my head a lot. I went and, read books about money. Like, why do all these kids have more money than my family does, right? And so I'd go and read some of these sort of books about financial success and stuff like that. And then I grew up and I let that go. And then a couple years, after I went to school and after I studied math. And so afterwards, during school, I was looking for, I learned to code, and like, long story short. And after school, I joined a financial technology startup. And what we were basically doing is making like programmable money in a sense. And, but we were doing it on top of basically a prepaid API from MasterCard. So we had some software that could issue these prepaid debit cards, like everyone in a company, and then they could use apps like a web app, a mobile app, to handle permissions around spending the company's money on their card without having to, let's say, spend their own money and get reimbursed. And so it was basically like programmable money. It's a programmable treasury for the company. You could an accountant could say like, oh, so-and-so's going on a trip, or a manager, let's authorize them to spend some money, but make sure they have to upload receipts, kind of say what is necessary in order for the spending to be valid. And so it was like programmable money, but it wasn't, of course, there was no Austrian economics in my mind or anything like that. But I was very attracted to this idea of like improving how capital works. And I think that's, in the end, why I like this company. And the company ended up, we were close to being a big deal, but it kind of fell apart. And a couple of things we did is like, the Square Cash card that a lot of people have. We built the API that prototyped that. Venmo has a card program. We basically spun that up for them. It was a bunch of, we did some cool stuff, but it didn't end up working as a company. And then so after that finished, I sort of like bounced around for a little while and was looking for the next thing. And actually, when the price was going crazy last year, my mom called me one day and was like, Justin, I'm really concerned. Your dad is buying these like internet coins, and he wasn't investing in them. He just liked the meme coins. Like Putin coin was his favorite coin. He thought it was, he just wanted to go to the grocery store and pay with Putin coin because he just thought that was so funny, or like pay his taxes in Putin coin. Okay, IRS, here's a little Putin coin, right? Just like, and so that was when I'd encountered Bitcoin, but I always thought it was sort of like a stupid nerd thing, right? I didn't think it was something normal people would be interested in. And that was the thing that made me check my assumptions. It was like, hey, something's going on here. My dad, not really tech literate, can't really send text messages. It wasn't that he was using it as an investment. He just thought it was like, he thought it wasn't a joke, or, he thought it was at least a joke worth participating in. And so, so I was like, oh, there's something here. And so that kind of was a year ago or so. And I just like slowly got more and more interested in it. And then about 6 months ago, I kind of decided like, hey, I should really pursue this like kind of full time, because I have the right background. Like I have a math degree. I know how to code. I've read some economics books. Like I have, Bitcoin's very interdisciplinary, and so if you have two or three of these things that it builds upon, I think that helps you kind of transition. And so then I went and did Jimmy Song's programming blockchain class, which I really recommend. It's great if you're a programmer. This is like Bitcoin programming, and that really got me started. And then it's been just kind of that was 6 months ago. And so that's basically when I decided to make a run at it, and yeah, here I am. So I've only really been in Bitcoin for 6 months.
Yeah, fantastic story, Justin. Now, I didn't want to cut you off earlier, and one question I had was around the payments narrative, right? So you came from what was arguably the fintech background in a payments company. Now, many of those people who had that certain focus, they sort of got distracted by things like Bcash and falling into what Pierre Rochard might have termed something like a payments maximalist position, and worrying too much about how many TPS, transactions per second, rather than understanding Bitcoin as a broader sound money aspect. How did you avoid falling into that payments trap?
I think because I looked at it briefly a couple years ago, and it seemed like it was just crap for payments. Like it wasn't. Visa's like objectively better at payments, and MasterCard and all that. And so it's like, I was that illusion was I lost that years ago, because it's just clearly better. And so that's basically explains why I didn't get into it for so long. It's like I had that. A better way of saying it is like I did have payments maximalism. I thought that like the important thing for a financial technology was like how easy or how useful it was for payments. And so that's why I didn't get into Bitcoin. Like I didn't understand the monetary aspect of things. And so I was like, yeah, screw Bitcoin. It's just like needlessly complicated, right? And so yeah, like that was really like losing that and understanding that basically money could be improved. Like that just never occurred to me that you could improve money. I thought it was like, I don't know. I thought it was like some platonic ideal that like we inherited, and it's just like this thing that you can't change, right? It's just like a natural element of our universe. And so when I questioned that, I was like, oh, you could actually like there's this really smart group of people who's actually trying to change money, and not that they were, but like that's important. Because like at the end of the day, I think I'm really like a capitalist. I believe that the price mechanism, markets, free markets are really what drive progress and make the world better. And so when I see I've always when I seen like a controlled market, like some market the government manages, I'm like, oh, how horrible! This is like we should get rid of that. But it never occurred to me that money was a controlled market by the government, right? And so like that's when it hit me, is like, oh yeah, payments are not a big deal compared to like monetary policy and stuff like that, because the government has a chokehold on the market for capital, right? The most important market for if you're sort of like of the capitalist persuasion. So that was really what made me turn away from payments and look towards like monetary policy. But I guess a related thing, just as like a side note, is like I actually was interested in Ethereum much earlier. This is like the other loophole, right? Or this is the other thing people get stuck on, right? It's like I don't know, what would you call the
the smart contract blockchain maximalist,
yeah, exactly.
I guess.
Yeah. Smart contract blockchain utility. Yeah, like some utility thing, right? Like they want utility of whatever the heck that means. And so yeah, I encountered that like 4 or 5 years ago. Basically, like I was interested in Ethereum before the ICO. I just never thought it was an investment. I thought it was like a app development platform, basically. So I never thought of buying any. But like when it came out, I forgot about it for a while. When it came out, I tried to build like a bookie, right? Because I'm sitting here like, well, what could I build with this that I can't build with AWS, Amazon Web Services, right? Because that was like Amazon Web Services is like the old school centralized world computer, and Ethereum is like the new school decentralized world computer. So I'm like, okay, if this is such a great thing, I should be able to build one useful app on it, right? So I tried to build a bookie. It's like a program that you could make sports bets on, and it would pay you. And I just completely failed. I couldn't figure out how to get it to work, and I had trouble running the node, and I just had trouble all over the place. And so that kind of, after that point, I was never really interested in Ethereum anymore, because it seemed like So like I gave it a shot, and there's only so much time, and so I turned away from that as well. And Bitcoin of all these different value propositions that people in this quote unquote crypto space present, like the kind of the monetary maximalist is the only position that really stuck. Like I have a very open mind, and I'll consider every one of them, but it's the only one that really I was able to find interesting for a prolonged period of time.
Excellent. So, on this topic of monetary maximalism, what is it that drove you to that belief? And then, I guess the next part is how do you think about this idea of conviction, conviction of belief in Bitcoin superiority?
I think, the thing that really got me was like, this is kind of a cop out, but reading Saifedean's book and the Bitcoin Standard, and reading basically everything on the Nakamoto Institute, the website that Pierre Richard and Michael Goldstein run, was really like the thing that completely rewired my beliefs on these things. Like I never encountered any of these ideas before, like the history of money, the kind of the properties it has, some of the shortcomings current money had with old money, the fact that like a free market money would behave very differently than a fiat money. Like to me, that was the thing that just understanding that our current condition wasn't really natural, and that the economy worked really well when we had a gold standard, in the late 1800s, which Saifedean really goes in depth with in his book. To me, that was like and like I'm an engineer, so I really appreciate simplicity. And so, like all of us, I took an economics class at some point and was like, none of this makes any sense, right? And like, I was studying math. Like I can understand what you're saying, but it's like, boy, it seems contrived and convoluted. And then so you present, you have the central bank that like creates money out of nowhere and has, gives it to them, and, gives it here and there. And kind of like, there's this whole industries that spend all their time just trying to interpret what this oracle says. It seems like primitive to me. It seems like stuff they used to do in ancient Greece. And so like to the engineer in me, and that's sort of the monetary side. On the financial side, like, Visa and MasterCard are on a technical level just like houses of cards. Like when we built this previous kind of API for issuing debit and credit cards, like programmable debit and credit cards, they sent us their API documentation in a bunch of Excel files. And we basically had to parse these Excel files and sort of like generate a schema that we thought their API would follow, and then test it. And of course, it was wrong all over the place. And there's all kinds of undocumented behavior. And eventually we were going to do this is like with one of the multi-billion-dollar payment processors, like a really big company, a huge company we were interacting with. And, we were going to do a credit card platform, and it actually ran on a mainframe. And so it's like this, to the engineer in me, this is all like super convoluted, because you want like a simple system. Like simple systems work the best, and it's all about choosing what the right kind of, in a system, it's all, having the right abstractions and having the like simple composable pieces that you can put together to do complicated things. Like that's what a really good system looks like. And to both the U.S. monetary system and to the financial system, like the world monetary system, the world financial system, they're both like extremely contrived, and there's just so much like excess that you could cut away. And so I think that's one of the other things, as I started to do more actual like Bitcoin programming and understood how like the protocol works. It's like, oh my God, there's like that was one of the things I think that really got me interested, is like, it's just so much more simple and elegant. And I think that will lead to just inefficiencies all over the place based on my experience as a programmer. So yeah, those were the things that really got me interested. And then on the conviction side, the second part of your question, like, I guess, when you compare Bitcoin to other things, it's like, I tend not to see many differences in terms of like what it does. Like, I don't think there are, I come at this from like, spending some time in the startup community, and like, if you want to displace an incumbent in a startup environment, you have to be way, way, way better than them, right? Like we were trying to, displace, for example, we had like an expense management product and we were trying to displace Expensify. Like it had to be, we ended up not being good enough. And to displace an incumbent, you have to be like, not incrementally better, but vastly better. Just because there's all these hidden switching costs, which you understand better by reading some economics. And like there's all these like hidden costs that are on the other side of any like foreseeable benefit, right? Like the idea that Ethereum has an added benefit of being more programmable, right? That's true, maybe, but it is true. Like there are benefits there, but there are also costs, right? It's much harder to secure a system that has basically a more complicated programming language embedded inside it. And so yeah, I come at it from that angle. Like you have to be vastly better. And so when I look at things that are non-Bitcoin, it's like they don't really seem much different. Like, like maybe you could look at something like Monero and say maybe, yeah, it's a little better, like because you can, you have a little more privacy. But then again, maybe it isn't because it's like a little less security, right? And security is really the thing that matters most in magic internet money. You want it to be really secure. That's the thing that's going to go wrong most of the time. And so like it arguably has more benefit, but then like that's not nearly enough benefit to unseat an incumbent. And that's what Bitcoin is at this point. We're like 10 years in, Bitcoin is an incumbent. It has a really strong position. And so like when I look at competing currencies, it's like something like I'd be open to something if it were truly better, but it'd have to be better and inclusive of all switching costs and all these hidden costs of, everybody redoing their cold storage and all the, the online payment things like BTC Pay Server, BitPay, all these things completely changing. Everybody has to relearn how this new thing works. You throw away all the branding that Bitcoin accumulated over 10 years. Like it has to be inclusive of all these things. And when I look around, nothing's close. Nothing is close at all. So yeah, at this point, I'm not even interested. I'm just not interested. They're not enough to overcome the huge lead that Bitcoin has. So
yeah, fantastic thoughts. And it's excellent that you can bring such a mature view to this, having only been in the game for 6 to 12 months, right? And I guess if I had to summarize your thoughts, it's around Bitcoin's overall simplicity versus the modern day banking world, and also just the fact that in order to displace Bitcoin, it pretty much has to be 10x better, to use the sort of often used VC wording. Yeah,
you have to be wearing a vest. You have to be wearing a vest, a Patagonia vest, to say that. I think it's like I believe.
No vest on today for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how about now? This is an area where it's very common to make errors. There are so many pitfalls.
Let me jump in and just say one thing. Like I think one of the things one of the things that's really great about Bitcoin is that you get this slow drip of new people. And the slow drip of new people are like you don't have any new cryptographers coming in. Like all the cryptographers got it in the past, or they're never going to get it. And so it's like that perspective is well represented, but it's like, like maybe my generation is like, a little heavier on the people from like a startup fintech background. And we bring in like, the next generation is going to be heavier on Wall Street. The Wall Street people are just starting to get it. And so I think it's really great how you have these new kind of generations of people coming in, and they all have their unique and valuable experiences. And I think that's a really great thing about Bitcoin, just in terms of its strength as sort of a social phenomenon. But I think it's also a great thing about, a great reason to work in the space is like, geez, it's never boring. You're surrounded by such intelligent, interesting, diverse people. And I think that's just like, I don't know, people like the mainstream view on this just does not get that at all. It's like, it's such a diverse group of people. Like, so I teach this class, and like right now, I mean, we have like a rapper, we have a new mother, we have like people from any kind of technical background. We have like, I mean, we have people all over the world. Like it's just people from like a financial background, attorneys, accountants. We have like all these different backgrounds, and I think that's really a great thing about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I like that as well. I like that there's a big mix of people who are now coming into Bitcoin. I think it's also just been very challenging because there are so many ways that people can get distracted. Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's still a hard one. Like I mean, my latest thing about this that sort of keeps me up at night is, so I went to the Lightning Hack Day, right? And so this was in New York City. It was like a 2-day hackathon, and before that was this residency for Lightning development at Chain Code Labs. And so I came like when that was ending. Like I applied to that, and they didn't let me in because I hadn't done anything with Lightning. And the reason I hadn't done anything with Lightning is I've been purposely ignoring it, right? Because I don't want to get distracted. There's so many shiny objects that if you chase every one of them, you're never going to get anywhere. So I've purposely ignored Lightning, even though I think it's fascinating. And so when this like residency comes, I try to apply. Of course, they reject me because like I clearly haven't even attempted anything. And then so I come the last day and watch the pitches, and I'm just like, oh my God, what an amazing missed opportunity. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't change what I did, because like I think it was, you just want to start. Like what I've done is I just focus on a little thing, trying to understand how the Bitcoin protocol works on a technical level. Like every once in a while, I'll read an article on Lightning. I'll read an article on monetary policy. Maybe I'll try to read some Austrian economics or some of these people recommend to me. But like, I don't get very far on any of the stuff besides like actually trying to understand how the Bitcoin protocol works on a technical level. And the foundation. And that's all I've done for 6 months. And I'm starting to get a grasp on it. But like, I've had to ignore everything. So yeah, that's been really successful for me, just ignoring it. And I mean, sometimes you fall into the trap. I think one of the most dangerous things is watching the price, because it's like, you just really got to not do that. It just hijacks your mind. Like, and we're all, I don't know, even like I tell myself, oh, I'm some like, I'm a programmer, I'm in it for the right reasons. No, I'm not. I mean, like if I'd stare at that price too long, I'd become possessed by it just like everybody else. So that's pretty dangerous. I don't know. I think you see some of the people in Bitcoin, like I noticed some people like have made a lot of money on it, and now they just basically live off like the crypto trader people on Twitter. And I think that's a pretty dangerous thing to do too. Like I think the smart thing to do is just like lock it away and try to, pay your bills in some other manner. Because I think at the end of the day, you just want to be productive. And if you find some like windfall financial gain, you shouldn't stop being productive. It's kind of like what lottery winners do, and that really doesn't turn out well. So that's something I see people do that like I wish they do a little less of. And I really, if I get lucky and the Bitcoin I bought very recently appreciates, like I'm going to try not to like live off that, because I see a lot of people doing it, and it doesn't seem to be a very good life. And yeah, I mean like I've never heard anyone talk about that, but like a lot of these conferences I go to, yeah, it's like a lot of these people just kind of stop being productive, and like, humans are kind of beasts of burden. You need to like pull a heavy load, and so that's something I'm going to try to avoid. And I think, another big kind of error I see people do, I kind of addressed it already, but there's this idea of like, what constitutes a better Bitcoin? And people just dwell on this, right? It's like this is what all that Coinbase thinks about. This is like all that Bitmain, all the biggest companies besides basically like BitMEX, they're all kind of dwelling on how to make a better Bitcoin. All the VCs, everyone's like either because they actually think it's possible or because they're trying to scam people. And like, I think I just don't think people think about that properly. Like they don't think of all the switching costs involved, and all the really strong group of people that Bitcoin has accumulated over 10 years. I just don't think I think everyone dwells on that. And I don't think it's like, I think they really misunderstand it. And, a lot of the people who've done that got, wrecked buying altcoins in the past, or I don't know, they're just in these like ridiculous, they're just like over engineering everything. Like one thing you learn doing startups is like, you really want to avoid over engineering, redoing things, writing code too fast. Like you see, like I look at Ethereum now, and I see them, there's a lot of stuff about, it seems like they're trying to start to hurry development. Like they're clearly behind schedule. They've promised all these things and can never ship them. And now they're going to try to like make up for lost time. And boy, that is like, to anyone who's been in like a startup environment and watches, or a software development environment, watch that happen. It's really red flags, because you just can't make this stuff go any faster. And then you look at Bitcoin, and it's like, boy, these people have like the patience of angels. Like, the Bitcoin developers are so patient. Like you go in, Pierre Richard has this great site called Bitcoin Acts, ACKS, that kind of tracks, what's moving, how the attempted changes to the Bitcoin code are progressing. A lot of these things, they're not accepted for like 6 months, right? And like that's or a year. It's a really long time to wait for a small code change, like 10 or 20 lines of code. But that's how it should be in something that's so mission critical and important. And that conservatism I really like about the Bitcoin core developers. And I really admire it because I tend to be kind of a cowboy when I'm coding. Like I'm not nearly as conservative as I should be. And so I really admire that. And then you look at some of these other things, like some of these like just seat of the pants decisions that these Bitcoin Cash forks have made, like disallowing, like hard coding a protection against 10 plus block reorgs, like stuff like that. It's like I think that the conservatism of Bitcoin is really superior to those philosophies.
Yeah, and I think I like the comments you were making, and it also ties back to this idea of working on something that's meaningful. And people need meaning, and it's not, some people may have, and there are cases of Bitcoin rich people who continue working, not because, they need to work, but because they want to.
Yeah.
And they've chosen a career in an area that is meaningful to them. And part of that is you want to work on a protocol that you believe is going to last for the long run.
Yeah, it's a beautiful it's a beautiful setup that, like, I was talking to some friend in the startup world, and it's like, we were just talking about the kind of the incentives of the Bitcoin core developers. And like, you look at some of these people who've been around a long time, if they bothered to buy any coins, it's appreciated a lot. And they're now like kind of financially secure. And so you have this like class of people who are all financially secure, who don't really need a steady income. And they're able to like, they're extremely independent, and then they're also, it's like an opt-in, completely meritocratic environment. So you just get sort of the most random. You get such a kind of a diverse group of people that are the most prolific contributors to Bitcoin Core, and I think that's like I don't know of any other system that's really like that, where the kind of the financial incentives of the developers are at once so aligned with the success of the project, but also sort of like, nobody can, there's kind of no boss to like punish them in any way. They all can assert their independence in a very, very strong way that a traditional kind of hierarchical organization just does not allow like an individual contributor to do, right? You're always accountable to this structure of bosses and stuff, which is really great in many conditions. But I think in terms of like such a purely kind of like a really technical development of a protocol, it's probably better to have this independence and this freedom. And you don't run into this problem like that, some of these open source projects have, where they have like one guy who's maintained it for 10 years, who's a genius and who's broke, right? That's a big problem that open source projects have. Many of these like cryptography libraries that underlie the internet, it's like you can go read an article. They're maintained by one guy who basically like lives in a doghouse, right? It's too bad, and it's not a good thing for that protocol. But Bitcoin kind of escapes this problem in a unique way.
Let's now talk about this idea of, sort of related as well, is this idea of building up a career without necessarily going through the traditional pathway for that. So, for example, there are a lot of people now who are learning to code online, and they don't necessarily have a computer science degree. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this is one of the like, if I weren't doing Bitcoin stuff, I would probably be working in education. I've jumped around schools all the time when I was a kid because I always hated the schools I was in. I finally got to this fancy prep school, ended up dropping out. Probably was the first kid in forever that dropped out. And then I went to college briefly, dropped out again. Finally got an honors math degree. So I have like this really weird academic background, and I just have hated school every time I'm there. So I really like this I like what's happening where like really highly regarded employers, for example, like Wall Street banks, startups, stuff like that, they're starting to hire more people who don't come from like that for reasons other than pure credentials, which is the way it was for a couple decades here. And I think that's a really good thing, because I think a lot of these programs are super expensive and don't add very, very much value. They basically just, like if you make it through Harvard, it's not like Harvard added anything. It's like you were the one in 1,000 that could run the gauntlet, and so you just had that kind of innate ability, or I mean, mostly innate ability, right? Mostly IQ. Like that's really what is being signaled. Like you were able to get 1,600 on your SAT, good for you. And so I think it's a lot better to, or you had a really good work ethic, right? Like, so I think it's great that we're able to, like, I see all these opportunities that people are finding to build a career, to find meaningful work, and to assemble, to figure out how to do this in like 6 months or a year instead of like 4 to 6 to like, I mean, sometimes like 10 years, right? If you do a undergrad and then get a PhD, that's 10 years, right? Some of my friends are getting medical degrees. It's like 4 years plus another 4 plus 3. It's like 11 years, right? And then you actually get a job. You are a doctor. And so I'm really excited about some of this stuff. And so that's why rambled a little bit there. But and so yeah, like one of the things that's really, and this gets into what I'm kind of working on now, is like, it's one of the things that's really interesting is like, I think there's, I think that the number of programming jobs doubles like every 5 years. I think that's been one of these like consistent trends over the last like 50 years. I forget if it's 5 years or less than that. It's like, it's kind of like a Moore's law type thing. It just consistently doubles. And so, we're finally getting to the point where it's like your everyday person kind of has a reason to learn to code, and there's just like endless employers, software is eating everything. And so I just think this is a really interesting thing. Like I look back to my own educational experience. I spent probably $50,000 on this like math degree, and no one's ever asked me for a diploma. I only recently started using any of the specific things I learned actually to understand how like Bitcoin digital signatures work. We actually used some math that I studied in college, which was kind of cool. But that's the only time it's ever been useful. And so I had to put up with like 2.5 years of this crap. Whereas like if I had gotten interested in Bitcoin, I surely could have taught this stuff to myself if I was sufficiently motivated. So I think this is like a big change. It's like people find you can, instead of like this like just in case learning where you say, I'm going to go learn all this stuff just in case I need it. You can go find something you're really interested in. Like, let's say I want to be a Bitcoin developer, or let's say, I want to be a writer, or like, like some sort of like content creator on the internet or something like that. Like a podcast producer or something like that. You can just go and learn the things you need to do that. And since the internet's wide open, you can get in there. And so yeah, like I had this math degree, it never was worth anything. And then I did a coding class online. It was, I tried a couple free ones and I never actually got anywhere. And then I did a paid one where I paid like $300 a month and was like kind of accountable to a mentor. And that was actually what got me to turn the corner. And so within 6 months after, that was like a 3-month course during college. After I finished that, within a couple of weeks, I was able to get my first like internship and then a job. And so like every dollar I've made basically for the past 5 years has been because of that $900 I spent on that class. The $50,000 I spent on a math degree has been completely useless in an economic sense. And so, yeah, I see a lot of this stuff that's kind of opening up. And, I'm really jealous of these like 18-year-old kids who get a coding job. Like there's some really young kids in Bitcoin now that are starting to contribute in a big way. And it's like, good God, you guys, it's such a better path. You get to escape crushing debt. You get to find meaningful work immediately. You get this like experience in the real world while everybody else is still getting kind of like theoretical knowledge and getting polluted by ideologies. Like everyone at a university is like a Marxist these days. And so you're lucky if you escape that environment without being polluted a little bit with some of these like kind of anti-productive ideologies. So yeah, I just think there's there's some huge asymmetries in education right now. Like this $900 class has gotten me hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary over the years. And then like my $50,000 degree is worthless. And you see this all over the place. Like I really encourage everybody involved in Bitcoin to like, if you don't know about, if you don't have if you have a fulfilling career, that's great. Like, I think most people should just continue doing that and then buy Bitcoin. Like, in terms of like, what if you want to help, like, that's a good way to help, right? Help adoption by adopting it yourself. That's probably the most you can do. But if you don't have a career, a fulfilling career, like, try coding. You really should try it. I think everyone should try it. Unless you already have a thing, and so and I think it's a lot easier than people think. Like, it's actually possible. You don't have to be a genius. There's the average programmer makes like over $100,000, and you can do that within like 2 years. Usually, you can get enough experience to get like to a mid-level position that pays like that. It's really fun. It's like if you like video games, it's like a video game kind of like, but it's productive. And so yeah, this is kind of one of the things I'm really big on, is like, if you don't have a fulfilling career, consider learning to code, because it's a really fulfilling career for many people, and it pays really well, and it gives you a lot of financial and time and location freedom. And so yeah, that's kind of rambled a little bit there again, but yeah, that's
I think that's a great way to put it, because what we're seeing happen now is we're seeing almost these competing theories of how you demonstrate your value. One of those is this idea that you signal and you get a credential from the university or from the gatekeeper, and then the other model that they sort of say is, oh, well, actually, maybe some of that value is coming from what's called the human capital model, as in those universities are really teaching you marketable skills. But then the question, and to what you were saying earlier, is that there is that big price differential, because if you are just paying $800 for a coding class versus paying $50,000 for a math degree, well, there's a big difference. Now, another model some people have spoken about is this idea of kind of like signaling, but in a different way. So let's say you learn to code, but then you need a way to signal to future employers that you that you can code, right? And one way is to have a portfolio on GitHub and so on. What are some ways that you can demonstrate your ability?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things there are, like, when people learn to code, they're like, so I've this is kind of like my Twitter brand. It's like I basically help HODLers learn to code. Like, that's what I've been doing. As I kind of broke into Bitcoin, I found that like there was a lot of people who are interested and like nobody helping them. So that's kind of, I have a lot of people that I talk to that I'm kind of helping through this. And so one of the questions they always have is like, well, how do I get a job? I don't want to commit to this unless I can find a job. And it's a hard thing to answer. Like, for me personally, what I did was I went and showed up to like every meetup I could find. I built one project that was really crappy, and if you were a experienced programmer, but if you were a complete noob like I was, it showed a lot of like resourcefulness. And so I would just go to meetups and like talk to people. And if anybody was like, had a company of any kind, I'd kind of show them the thing. And I think it took me like 3 meetups to find the job I ended up getting. Like, I met a guy who was one of the first programmers at Pinterest. He's like, I got a startup. It sounded kind of interesting. And I showed him, and like, boom, I was basically hired. And so like what worked for me was like just building something, just doing the best I could while I was still unsophisticated. And like, there aren't a lot of people out there who are new to it that can actually produce. Like, you want to demonstrate the ability to produce. That's what any kind of employer wants. When you're an employer, you look at people and say, like, can this person produce? Can I tell them a end goal, and will they make it happen? And for most people, the answer is no. And so if you can just like show some history of doing that, and like, so GitHub's a great way. Like, the surest way to get hired as a programmer is to just have this GitHub. It's like kind of a portfolio. If you have like 1 or 2 interesting projects there that relate to whatever you're trying to do, that are like not just super basic, like, you're already in the super elite category, because there aren't many people like that. You just go to this like rarefied air instantly. And a lot of other ways is like in Bitcoin in particular. Like, I mean, within like a month of taking that first class, I started like basically, met some people at a conference, started giving them, I do like a once a week, like hour-long class where I basically taught whatever I learned that week. And it was mostly like the peer-to-peer network programming, how to like, one of the first things we wrote a crawler that could go crawl all the nodes on the network, or not all the nodes that advertised their presence and weren't using Tor. And so we go and crawl that. We ended up basically doing a simple version of initial block download. And this took like 2 months, but every weekend we'd get on, and actually Rigel, one of your previous guests, was one of the people that I met at a conference, and he'd kind of hop on.
Nice.
And so this was like a really good thing, because I just started like sharing what I learned. And, within like 3 months, like this was on Jameson Lopp's resources page, his list of all the best resources in Bitcoin. It's got like tons of views. And I've done this now with a few kind of video sets. I started a meetup. Like that's another way to do it. It's just like, invite people and then give them a talk on what you know. Like these are all ways that you can demonstrate what you know, like giving talks, like putting out some content on YouTube, putting a thing on GitHub, talking at a conference. And there's just a huge, like wherever you are, there's a shortage of this stuff. People will, if your content is good at all, if you understand what you're doing at all, you can create good content, really. And if your content is good at all, there's tons of people who would consume it. And you're like, almost instantly you're in this kind of rarefied era, because people are too lazy to do that, really. There aren't many people that go and do all these things. So those are a couple ways that you can just sort of like, that's what my recommendation is always just like, go produce something. Just be like when you get into some sort of like you want to just exude productivity to whoever is considering hiring you when you're trying to break into a field, and you'll just get hired instantly. Because just most people aren't productive. That's my experience, and that's what I kind of try to. It's sort of like a wishy-washy description, but I think this is the way you got to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I think hopefully the listeners are now feeling motivated to get out there and do their own project. And if they want to learn, tell them a little bit about BUIDL Bootcamp and the structure of it.
BUIDL Bootcamp, yeah. So BUIDL Bootcamp, that's I don't think anybody likes the word BUIDL. It's kind of like a stupid. Like HODL is cool, BUIDL, you don't even know how to pronounce it, but I was like,
Agreed.
I don't really like it myself, but it's like it's very descriptive, and that's why I chose it for the name. It's like, I tell you it's BUIDL Bootcamp, you basically know exactly what it's going to be. It's like a online programming bootcamp, the Bitcoin programming bootcamp. So the long-term vision is like, let's say in a couple of years when we have our next bull market, and we have this flood of programmers who want to learn how Bitcoin works, I would like to be able to plug them into this class, and in like maybe 3 months part-time, get them up to speed, so they're kind of like a Bitcoin programmer. They could switch from whatever banking job they have to maybe a Bitcoin job once there's that more of a market for this stuff. But at the moment, there honestly aren't many Bitcoin programmer jobs, and they're all filled by people who've been at it for a few years, who are super, super expert. And so kind of on my way to that, like that's my end goal. What I'm at right now is I basically teach HODLers how to code. So like we basically have 3 kind of extended projects we do. And, maybe half my class is a somewhat experienced programmer, half my class is kind of new. I send them to a intro Python programming class. Python is a programming language. It's like the simplest language, which is why I use it. So like the ideas are really complex. We want a very simple language, so that's the language is not what's confusing us. It's the confusing ideas, or the complex ideas rather. And so yeah, that's kind of the breakdown. Maybe half the people are experienced, half the people are new. And so we do these 3 projects, and this is how I'm teaching people how Bitcoin works. The first project is we build a little mini implementation of the Bitcoin network in Python. So it's a little mini network that can run on your computer that has all the core ideas of Bitcoin, right? It has like proof of work mining. It has transaction inputs and outputs. It has digital signatures. It has a peer-to-peer network. So you can run multiple peers, and they have to all kind of connect to each other and propagate new transactions and blocks. It has chain reorganizations, which is like we're still kind of working on. I'm still kind of working on that. But to be able to go through and build a project step by step that can actually do a chain reorganization. This is when you have a fork, and this fork kind of surpasses the longest chain that you have, and then so that becomes kind of your new chain. If it someone else's chain gets longer than yours, you have to go and basically rewind history and then play history forward on this new chain, updating, like basically undoing your UTXO database and redoing it on this new chain. And that's really hard to do. And like my students now, many of whom didn't know how to program a month ago, are learning how to do this, which is really great. And so the way we go at it is at the beginning, like it's really hard. So this was inspired by a project called TinyChain. TinyChain's like a 1,000-line little mini implementation of Bitcoin. And by the way, this doesn't like interoperate with the real Bitcoin network at all. It's like a little separate mini thing. And so I saw this and I was like, this really helped me understand. But it's like, well, how do you teach people about this? There's just so many things going on at once. You really want to find a way to build it up incrementally. And so what I did was I started with like the stupidest version of digital cash that I could think of. Basically, it's like the way that this, it's called PNG coin, PNG for the like .png photographs.
Oh, right.
The way it's transferred is like you take a picture of a physical signature saying like, I, Alice, give this coin to Bob, and then you sign Alice, right? And so you can visually inspect the history of every one of these coins, and by opening up these PNG files, and you can see whether the coin's valid or not, right? It actually is kind of, you could use it as digital cash. But it has every problem you can imagine. It can be trivially counterfeit. The first transaction is basically issued by Donald Trump. He's like, I, Donald Trump, give this to you. And it's a picture of him holding up the executive order. So like you can go and create one of these in a meme generator, right? So you can create fake coins easily. You can, say I, Alice, yada, yada, and sign Alice, even if you're not Alice. You can forge transactions. You can double spend because you can, make one transfer, give it to someone else, make another transfer, give it to a different person. They have no idea who got it first. It has like every problem. I won't go over every problem. And so what we do is step by step, we address the biggest problem and we make like a slightly better version. So the obvious first thing to do is remove the photographs of analog signatures. And so we do that. We introduce digital signatures, which is what Bitcoin uses, and they're great. And so you actually understand like, oh, this is why Bitcoin or digital signatures are great. This is why Bitcoin uses them. And then, the next problem is like, well, these can still be really easily double spent. So we introduce like a bank, right? And that's great. A bank, a central authority can remove the risk of double spending, but it has some other risks, right? It becomes a honeypot for activists and stuff like that. And so eventually we end up making like a peer-to-peer network. And so the problem with that is like, well, how do you keep your nodes in sync? Initially, we have like a fixed number of nodes, kind of like EOS. And these guys just take turns. But like if you want the number of nodes to fluctuate, if you want anyone to participate, so it's not like a syndicate, you need some way for them to agree. And that's what Bitcoin proof of work is. And, if you do that, then, sometimes you'll have, Bitcoin's proof of work model is really interesting because it actually allows like two valid chains to happen at the same time, right? Like if two people mine a block at the same time, both chains are kind of valid. And Bitcoin just says, well, we'll see who wins over time and which chain gets longer. And so, you have to be able to handle that now, which is like chain reorganizations. And so over these many steps, we basically, implement all these little versions of digital cash. We end up making like 12 of them. And at the end, you have basically a mini Bitcoin, and you really understand every line of it. It's 1,000 lines. It's a very large program. It's pretty complicated, and you understand it. So I think that's a really cool way of teaching Bitcoin. Like, this is just like what I wish I would have had access to when I got involved. Like, I wish somebody would have, I'm just making the class I wish I would have had when I got involved. And so that's the first thing we do. The second thing is we do just like raw Bitcoin network programming. So we go to the site bitnodes.earn.com. It's just a site that shows all the nodes on the network. And so you go and look up an IP address, right? The host name and the port. And you write a couple lines of Python code that will go try to connect to them. And of course, like the connection doesn't really work for some reason. And so we pull up some documentation and you learn about this version handshake. The version handshake is basically how two nodes on the Bitcoin network will agree to communicate to each other. It's like a very specific protocol you have to do. And so once you learn how to do that, then you can actually exchange messages with this node. And so we tried a couple different messages, and this is like, really raw, low-level programming. So you're sending like bytes over the network, which are basically numbers between 0 and 255. And so you have to figure out what these numbers between 0 and 255 mean. And, we learn how to do this in excruciating detail so that, if someone sends us a block that is just a bunch of numbers between 0 and 255, we can actually interpret, what the third transaction's second output is in that block because we learn what every byte means. And so this is really, I think it's a really interesting project, and it really gives you a sense of the distributed nature and permissionless nature of the Bitcoin network, right? Like usually when you're doing a coding project, the first thing you do is you go get API keys, right? If you want to code on Stripe, you have to go get API keys, which is permission to participate. In Bitcoin, that's not the case. In Bitcoin, you just have to figure out how to do the version handshake, how to talk to your peer. And it's really like eye-opening. And so this is really fun. We end up writing a crawler that can go crawl the network and then do initial block download, go and validate the first couple hundred transactions, 1,000 transactions. And so that's the second block, like all this like raw Bitcoin network programming. And the third part of the course, we build a hardware wallet. And so the hardware wallet is, we take a generic piece of hardware called an M5 stack. It's a $40 thing that has a screen and buttons and a little mini microcontroller, like a tiny little computer inside it. And then we use the same, basically the same heavily optimized cryptography code that Trezor uses on their devices to do like digital signatures and stuff really quickly on a low underpowered device. And we basically build a little mini Trezor. And that's really cool because you learn about what a private key is, how they're generated, how you can, generate, how seed words work, how you generate seed words, how you can get a secret from seed words, stuff like that. And so it's quite a lot of fun, and you get to create a little UI for a hardware wallet. And so that's another like really fun little project. So you have like the overall, it's like you do the how does the network work in general, in principle. That's the first week. The second week is like how can we talk to like the real Bitcoin peers, like our peers on the network, and get information from them? How do we speak their language? And the last one is like, well, how do you kind of secure Bitcoin? How do you make a secure hardware wallet and manage secrets and have a little fun along the way? So that's what it is now. I have ambitions for a week or two on Lightning, a week or two on fungibility, like make like a little mini Wasabi wallet. All these little projects I want to do. And, over the next couple of months, we'll figure out how to do all these. But that's where we're at now. And this month I got like 25 paid students. The course is like $800, which is pretty cheap, actually. Like it's less than it took me to learn to code. Some of the other like week, Bitcoin boot camps are like 2 days and they cost like $4,000. So it's a fifth that price. And if you sign up, you get kind of perpetual access. So as I add new stuff, you're just a part of the community and you get access to everything I add, and you can retake the class as many times as you want. So I'm trying to make it a really good deal for the first people because they're like the ones who are helping me bootstrap this. And so I try to make it a really good deal for the early adopters. And yeah, everyone's happy. I give them an option to quit. Like I'll refund them at any point if they don't like it, and nobody's asked for a refund yet. So it's going pretty well.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's excellent. You basically answered all the questions I was going to ask. I do have one actually.
You
were
learning. I interacted with you on the internet, and you were saying you kind of interested in learning how to do Python stuff just a little bit. Is that true? So I am actually learning a little bit myself. So I actually was thinking of doing it myself. So there you go. The next question I had was around. So this course is mostly in Python. Do you use mostly like a Python library, or is the idea that people would then also go and learn C++ as well? Yeah, so that's a great question. So one distinction is between Bitcoin protocol development and Bitcoin application development. If you're doing Bitcoin protocol development, you're probably going to be contributing to Bitcoin Core, the primary library that is used to run a Bitcoin node. It's the same code it was inherited from Satoshi. It's like the same code has just been slowly developed over time. And that's written in this language called C++, which is like a very low level, hyper optimized, really fast language, which is why we use it in Bitcoin Core, because it's really, really fast. And we want initial block download to be super fast as it can be. And so that's why it's a good fit. But it's sort of hard to understand sometimes. And when you look at the code, it looks kind of cryptic. And why I like Bitcoin, or why I like Python, is because you look at the code and it reads like an outline does. It's really like easy to look at and kind of understand roughly what it's doing, but it's kind of slow. And so when you're writing like a real protocol, you don't want to use Python. You want to use something really fast like C++. But when you're running, let's say writing an application, for example, like Electrum Wallet, the Electrum server. That's like one of the best light wallets. That bitnodes.earn.com, I was saying, this like crawler that gives you a topology of the network. What are some other examples? Like the firmware for a Trezor or the firmware for a cold card. Every one of these is software written in Python. And so for protocol development, Python is insufficient. For application development, Python in many cases is pretty good. And so the answer there is like, I try to prepare people more to be application developers. Because honestly, I'm not even qualified to teach the protocol development. Like, I haven't made any contributions to Bitcoin Core. I honestly don't think I should, because I'm not quite careful enough. Like, I want the people doing that to be just like so paranoid, and that's not me. Like, I am not a protocol developer. I'm not that security conscious. I'm not that paranoid. I'm not that detail oriented. Like, I like the big picture. I like to do things fast. I like to, slap things together kind of in a hacky way and make progress that way. And so that's perfectly fine. Like, I'm just not really a protocol developer, and that's fine. And I don't need to do that. And so that's my answer, is like, I'm focused more on the application development, but we build like a little mini, we learn a lot about the protocol by building a little mini version of it ourselves. And so if at that point you're like, hey, I think I am the kind of security paranoid type of person that makes a good protocol developer, then by all means, after that, I think you're in a really good position to try to deepen your knowledge of computer science. Now that you have this really interesting problem to chew on, right? You're not just becoming a computer scientist in case it's useful. You will learn computer science because you want to improve the Bitcoin protocol. You have a very specific task in mind, and I think that really helps. And so, if you took my course and make that decision, I think, yeah, go ahead and learn the deeper stuff. But I don't think I'm ever going to teach that. Like, I think what I would love to see in the future is if some of my maybe a couple of my students, if they want to do that, then they go and do a chain code residency. That's like, those guys are actual protocol developers, and they're the ones who should be teaching the protocol development. But it's really a niche thing. Like, in the future, you're going to have 1,000 application developers for every protocol developer if Bitcoin is mainstreamed, right? Like, there aren't many people that are developing the protocols underneath the internet. There's just a very small group of highly expert people. So yeah, that's kind of my answer.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. All right. Well, I think they're pretty much the key things that I wanted to hit. How about you just tell the listeners where to find you: Twitter, YouTube, website?
Yeah. So if you just search Justin Moon on Twitter, my name is Justin Moon with underscores on each side. But if you just search that, you'll find me. Website's justinmoon.com. On there, you can find some YouTube videos. Like the first week of my BUIDL Bootcamp is the videos are free online, which is, like, I try to kind of give back, and, I understand that not everybody can spend $800, and eventually I want to do scholarships and stuff, but at least now I put all the videos up online. So it's like going to be like 6-8 hours of content that's free, and it's really like in-depth stuff. And, like, I don't think any of my videos have a single dislike on Twitter or on YouTube, quite a few likes, no dislikes. So it's pretty good stuff. And so, yeah, you can find that on my website, justinmoon.com. And that's about it. Yeah. I mean,
oh, yeah. And the site for BUIDL Bootcamp.
Oh, yeah. The BUIDL Bootcamp. Yeah. Just BUIDL Bootcamp, BOOTCAMP, BUIDLBootcamp.com. That's a thanks, Stephen. I have an aversion to selling, apparently. But yeah, BUIDL Bootcamp, go check it out. Yeah, I'd love to have you in the class next month. I got about 15 people signed up. It's still 3 weeks to go, so I think it's going to be a good group. And if you join, you're kind of a part of the community forever. Over time, I'm going to try to get some TAs in there to kind of help answer questions and kind of get your kind of coding journey started. So I'm pretty pumped about it.
Yeah, no, it sounds exciting. All right, well, I think it's been a great conversation, and hopefully the listeners have gotten something out of it. Thanks very much for coming on, Justin.
Yeah, thanks. Next time I'll let you talk a little more. I kind of dominated the mic here, but thanks a lot for having me. It's yeah. I'll see you on crypto Twitter. See you online.
So there you have it, my conversation with Justin Moon. Make sure you check out his BUIDL Bootcamp and YouTube channel. Also, just a big thanks to my Patreon supporters. I got a few new supporters recently. My Patreon supporters get access to a private Telegram chat group where like-minded individuals can chat, and also I like to share some inside info such as upcoming guests. If you're interested to join, check out patreon.com/Stephan Livera. That's it from me. Thanks, and I'll speak to you guys next week.